There was a time in this country when a promise meant something, when a father's word to his child was a sacred thing, when a man would work himself to the bone, work himself into the ground just to keep a promise he had made years before. But somewhere along the way, we stopped keeping those promises. We got too busy. We got distracted. We started telling ourselves that good intentions were enough, but they are not. They never were. But what happened on that Tuesday afternoon on the Family Feud stage would remind every single person in that room, and millions of viewers watching at home, that some promises are worth a lifetime of waiting. Some promises, when they finally come true, can bring the whole world to a standstill. Steve Harvey had been hosting Family Feud for over a decade. He had seen thousands of families come and go. He had watched grown men cry. He had watched tough grandmothers laugh until they could not breathe. He thought he had seen it all. But in his entire career, he had never, not once, had the show interrupted mid-taping by a producer running onto the stage. It just does not happen. The producers at Family Feud are professionals. They stay in the wings. They stay on their headsets. They whisper into Steve's ear between rounds. They do not interrupt the show. They do not run onto the stage. And they absolutely do not do it while a family is standing right there at the podium, waiting for the next question. But that is exactly what happened that Tuesday afternoon. A young producer, still holding her clipboard, still wearing her headset, came walking straight out of the wings and right up to Steve Harvey in the middle of a round. The audience went silent. The family on stage froze. Steve turned toward her, confused. She leaned in and whispered something in his ear. And what Steve Harvey did next, the look on his face, the way his whole body reacted, would tell everyone in that studio that something extraordinary was about to happen. Before we get into this beautiful story that will genuinely restore your faith in humanity, please take 1 second right now and hit that like button below. Smash that subscribe bell too, because stories like this one are exactly why we do what we do. Trust me, you are going to want to stay until the very end. This is not a story you will forget. To understand why that producer interrupted the show, you first need to understand the man who was standing at the podium when she did it. His name was Walter Jennings. He was 64 years old, a retired factory worker from Ohio, a widower, and the kind of quiet, steady man that small-town America used to be full of. Walter had worked at the same steel plant for 43 years. 43 years. He clocked in at the same time every morning. He ate the same lunch his wife Ruth had packed for him. He clocked out at the same time every afternoon. He came home. He washed his hands at the kitchen sink. He kissed his wife on the forehead. He asked how her day was. And then he sat down at the same kitchen table and ate dinner with her every single night for 41 years of marriage. Ruth had passed away 3 years ago, cancer. Walter had nursed her through the last 18 months of her life. He had learned how to braid her hair when she got too weak to do it herself. He had learned how to make her favorite chicken soup. He had slept in a chair next to her hospital bed for the last 2 months, holding her hand while she slept. When she finally passed, Walter did not cry in front of anyone. He just went home. He sat at that same kitchen table, and he looked at the empty chair across from him for a very long time. The town had never seen a man love his wife the way Walter loved Ruth, and the town had never seen a man grieve the way Walter grieved after she was gone. But Walter was not on that Family Feud stage because of Ruth, at least not directly. Walter was on that stage because of a promise he had made to somebody else, a promise he had made 45 years ago, a promise he had never been able to keep. When Walter was 19 years old, fresh out of high school, he had a younger brother named James. James was only 12 at the time. The two of them were the only boys in a family of 5 kids. Their father had walked out on the family when James was just a baby. Their mother worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. Walter, being the oldest son, had stepped up. He became the man of the house at 14 years old. He taught James how to ride a bike. He taught him how to throw a baseball. He taught him how to shave when the time came. James looked up to Walter the way a little boy looks up to a hero. And Walter, being the kind of brother he was, tried his best to live up to it. When James was 12 and Walter was 19, James got sick, real sick. The doctors said it was a heart condition, something congenital, something nobody had known about. James needed a special surgery, the kind of surgery that could only be done at a big hospital in California. And it cost more money than Walter's family had ever seen in their lives. Walter did not think twice. He took a job at the steel plant that very week. He dropped out of the community college he had just started. He sent every single dollar of his paycheck home to help pay for James's treatment. He worked double shifts. He worked weekends. He did everything he could. James got his surgery. He survived. But the recovery was long. And during those long months in the hospital, Walter sat by his little brother's bed every Sunday. He brought him comic books. He read him baseball scores. And one Sunday afternoon when James was feeling especially low, Walter made him a promise. He said, "Jimmy, when you get better, when we are both grown up, I'm going to take you on the best trip of your life. You and me, just brothers, we will go anywhere you want, I promise." James smiled. He made Walter pinky swear on it. And Walter did, but life, as life so often does, got in the way of that promise. Walter met Ruth when he was 23. They got married at 24. The kids started coming. The bills piled up. James grew up and moved to Florida for work. Walter could not afford to travel. James could not afford to travel. They saw each other at Christmas, at funerals, at a few weddings in between. They loved each other fiercely, but they never took that trip. James passed away suddenly from a heart attack 18 months ago. He was 57 years old. His heart, the one that had been repaired 45 years earlier, finally gave out. Walter got the phone call on a Tuesday morning. He sat down at that same kitchen table. He stared at the same empty chair where Ruth used to sit. And for the first time since his wife died, Walter Jennings cried. He cried because his little brother was gone. He cried because he had outlived his wife. He cried because in 45 years he had never kept the promise he made to a sick 12-year-old boy in a hospital bed. He had never taken James on that trip. When Walter's daughter signed him up for Family Feud with his sister-in-law, his niece, and his 2 adult grandchildren, Walter did not want to go. He said he was too old. He said he did not need a television appearance. He said he just wanted to stay home. But his daughter insisted. She said, "Dad, you have not left the house for anything fun in 2 years. Please, just come. It will be good for you." Walter gave in. He put on the one nice shirt he owned. He flew out to Lowe's Angels. He stood on that stage. He had no idea that somebody out there, somebody he had never met, had been watching. And he had no idea that a promise made 45 years ago was about to be kept, just not in the way he ever could have imagined. The game started off slow. Walter was quiet. He was polite. He was exactly the kind of man you would expect a 64-year-old retired steelworker to be. He answered when spoken to. He nodded at the right moments. But you could tell his heart was not really in it. He was going through the motions because his daughter had asked him to. Steve noticed right away. Steve has been doing this long enough to read a person's story without them saying a word. He saw the way Walter's shoulders were a little too heavy. He saw the way Walter's smile did not quite reach his eyes. He saw a man who had been carrying something for a long, long time. In the first round, Walter's daughter stepped up for the family. She got a good answer and got her family ahead by 20 points. Walter clapped politely. He did not cheer. He did not whoop. He just clapped like a man at a funeral trying to be respectful. The second round went to the other family, the Morrison family from Georgia. They were loud. They were fun. They were everything the Jennings family was not. The Morrisons were whooping and hugging and having the time of their lives. Walter just stood there, watching, polite as always. It was during the third round that Steve decided to ask Walter a direct question. He walked over to the podium. He looked Walter in the eye, and he said, "Mr. Jennings, you have been awfully quiet over there. You doing okay, sir?" Walter gave him a small smile, a tired smile. "I am fine, Mr. Harvey. Just enjoying watching my family have fun." Steve nodded, but he was not going to let it go. "Walter, you mind if I ask you a question, man to man? Who are you here for today?" The studio got quiet. Walter looked at Steve for a long moment, and then in a voice so soft you could barely hear it through the microphone, Walter said, "I am here for my little brother, sir, James. He passed away a year and a half ago." You could feel the entire audience lean in. 200 people all holding their breath at the same time. Steve's eyes softened. He did not say anything for a moment. He just nodded, man to man. The way 2 grown men nod at each other when one of them has just said something that needs no reply. Walter continued, his voice still soft. "When my brother was 12, he got real sick, heart condition. He almost died. I promised him when he got better I would take him on a trip, just the 2 of us. I never got to take that trip, Mr. Harvey. Life got busy. And then my brother, he just ran out of time." Steve stood there quiet for a long moment. The audience was completely silent. Even the cameras seemed to stop breathing. Finally, Steve said, "Mr. Jennings, Walter, can I tell you something? You are not the first man to make a promise he could not keep, and you are not going to be the last, but I want you to know something. The fact that you still carry it. The fact that it still weighs on you 45 years later. That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of brother you were, and what kind of man you are." Walter nodded slowly. A single tear ran down his weathered cheek. He did not wipe it, he just let it fall. Steve reached over and put his hand on Walter's shoulder. The audience started clapping softly. The kind of clap that is not celebration, it is respect. The game kept going. Walter was a little more present now. He laughed at a couple of Steve's jokes. He gave a decent answer about things you might find in a garage. His family was holding their own, but Walter's mind was clearly somewhere else, somewhere far away. Somewhere 45 years ago in a hospital room making a pinky promise to a little boy. It was in the 4th round that something strange started happening backstage. Nobody in the audience could see it. Nobody on the stage could see it. But behind the cameras, there was a flurry of activity. A young producer with a clipboard was talking into her headset very fast. Another producer was holding up a cell phone. They were checking something, confirming something, making phone calls. One of them had tears in her eyes. The audience did not know it yet, but something had just come through to the production team. Something nobody could have planned for. Something that had arrived purely by chance, or maybe not by chance at all. Maybe by something much bigger than that. The round ended. Walter's family was ahead by a little bit. Steve was setting up the next question. He was mid-sentence when it happened. The young producer came walking straight out of the wings. She was not supposed to be there. The other producers were trying to wave her back, but she kept walking. She walked right up to Steve Harvey. She leaned in close. She whispered something in his ear. Steve's face did something nobody had ever seen it do before. His eyes went wide. He blinked. He took a small step back. He looked at the producer. He asked her to say it again. She said it again. Steve looked at the ground. He put one hand on his hip. He took a slow, deep breath. Then he looked up at Walter. The audience had gone completely silent. Every single person in that studio could tell something was happening. Even the other family on stage, the loud fun Morrisons from Georgia, had gone quiet. They were watching Steve, watching his face, trying to figure out what was going on. Steve cleared his throat. His voice was shaky. "Mr. Jennings," he said. "Walter, I need you to do something for me. I need you to look at the big screen behind me, and I need you to just breathe, okay? Just breathe." Walter looked confused. He looked at his daughter. She shrugged. She did not know what was going on either. Walter slowly turned toward the big screen at the back of the stage. The screen lit up. At first, it was just a black screen. Then a picture faded in. A picture of a little boy, maybe 12 years old. A hospital bed, smiling at the camera with a big toothy grin. His hospital gown hung loose on his shoulders. An IV was taped to his arm. Walter's face crumpled. It was a picture of James, a picture Walter had not seen in 45 years, a picture taken the week after James's surgery. Walter's hands flew up to his face. His whole body started shaking. The picture faded. Another one took its place. This one was newer. A middle-aged man, smiling, standing in a backyard somewhere. It was James, grown up, happy. Then another picture, and another, James at his wedding, James holding his first grandchild, James and Walter at a Christmas dinner probably 10 years ago. Then a picture of James with a young man who looked just like him. The screen faded to black. Then a caption appeared, just 3 simple words. "Uncle Walter, meet David." Walter's knees buckled. His daughter caught him. The audience was completely silent. Nobody understood what was happening. But Walter did. Walter was looking at something he had not known existed. Walter was looking at a nephew he had never met, a son of his brother James who had been alive in the world all this time and Walter had never known. Steve walked over to Walter. He put a hand on his back, and he said very quietly, "Mr. Jennings, there is somebody backstage who would very much like to meet you if you are ready." Walter could not speak. He just nodded. The audience had started to cry. They did not even know what was happening yet, but they knew it was beautiful. They could feel it in their bones. The studio held its breath. Steve looked toward the wings. He nodded. And from the darkness behind the curtain, a man stepped out. He was in his mid-30s, tall, strong-jawed. He had Walter's eyes. He had James's smile. He was wearing a simple blue shirt and khaki pants, and he was crying before he even reached the middle of the stage. Walter stood frozen, stared at this man coming toward him. The man stopped about 10 feet away. He looked at Walter. He opened his mouth to speak. He tried. He could not. He just stood there, tears streaming down his face. Finally, the young man got the words out. "Uncle Walter," he said, "I have been looking for you for a long time. My name is David. My father was James, your brother." Walter broke. There is no other word for it. He broke. A sound came out of him that was not quite a word and not quite a cry. It was the sound of 45 years of grief and regret and love all coming out at once. He stumbled forward. David met him halfway. And the 2 men, strangers and family at the same time, wrapped their arms around each other and wept. The audience was completely gone. Everybody was crying. 200 people in that studio, plus the crew, plus the cameras, plus Steve Harvey himself. Everybody. Some of them had their hands over their mouths. Some were openly sobbing. The Morrison family on the other podium was holding each other, crying together. Steve took a moment. He wiped his own eyes. He walked over to the 2 men, and slowly, gently, he asked David to tell the story. David stepped back. He kept one hand on his uncle's shoulder. His voice was rough with emotion, but he began to speak. "My father never knew I existed," David said. "When he was 21 years old, he dated a woman named Linda for about 6 months. They broke up. He moved on. He did not know she was pregnant. She did not tell him. She raised me on her own. I grew up in Missouri. I thought my biological father was just a man my mother had loved once and lost. I never knew his name. I never knew anything about him." Walter was listening, his eyes wide with disbelief. 2 years ago," David continued, "I did one of those DNA tests online just out of curiosity. I wanted to know my heritage. A few months later, a message came into my inbox. A woman had matched with me as a close relative, a cousin. I wrote back to her. She put me in touch with my father's sister, your sister, Uncle Walter, my Aunt Carol. Walter nodded. Tears were streaming down his face. Aunt Carol told me everything, David said. She told me about my father. She told me he was a kind man, a quiet man, that he had been sick as a kid but had lived a full life. She told me he had been gone for a year by then. She told me I had cousins, grandparents who had already passed. And she told me about you, Uncle Walter. She said you were the best brother my father ever had. She said you were the one who had kept the family together when their own father had left. She said you were the one who had worked yourself to the bone to save my father's life when he was 12 years old. Walter was shaking his head. He could not believe what he was hearing. He was hearing his brother's story told by a man he had never met, a man who had his brother's blood running through his veins. David continued. Aunt Carol and I started talking every week. She told me about every memory she had of my father. She sent me pictures, and she told me something else. She said you had always carried a guilt about a promise you had made to my father, a promise to take him on a trip. She said you had never got to keep that promise. And it broke her heart every time she thought about it. David looked at Walter. His voice cracked. Uncle Walter, I came here today because I wanted to meet you. I wanted to know my father's brother. I wanted to look you in the eyes and tell you something. My father lived a good life. He was happy. He had children. He had grandchildren. And he had a brother who loved him so much that he worked himself half to death to save his life. You did not fail him, sir. You saved him. And because you saved him, I got to exist. My kids got to exist, all of us. We are all here because of you. Walter could not speak. He just pulled David into another hug and held on like a man who was afraid to let go. The producer who had interrupted the show stepped forward. Her name was Karen. She was crying too. She explained to the audience what had happened. David had contacted the show 2 weeks ago. He had told them the whole story. He had asked if there was any way he could surprise his uncle. The producers had made it happen. They had flown David in that morning. They had kept him backstage. They had pulled together the photos and the video. They had done it all for a promise that needed to be kept. But it was what Karen said next that made the whole studio erupt. She said, Mr. Jennings, David has one more thing to tell you. Go ahead, David. David turned to his uncle. He took a deep breath. Uncle Walter, he said, I have taken time off work. My wife is home with the kids. I am here for a whole week, and I want to take that trip, sir. The one you promised my father, you and me. Wherever you want to go, we are going. I already booked it. It is all on me. We leave Saturday because my father waited 45 years for that trip, and I figure it is about time his brother finally got to take it. Walter lost it. He completely lost it. He fell into David's arms again. The audience rose to their feet. The applause was deafening. It went on for 4 straight minutes. Nobody wanted the moment to end. Nobody wanted to go back to a normal television show because what they were witnessing was not television anymore. It was something sacred. The episode aired 12 days later. Within 24 hours, the clip of Walter meeting his nephew had been shared over 70 million times. Major news outlets ran stories on it. Morning shows wanted interviews. Talk shows sent flowers. But Walter, being Walter, turned most of them down. He said he was a private man. He said the story belonged to his family, not to the world. The only exception he made was for Steve Harvey. He said he would sit down with Steve any time. That Saturday, just like David had promised, the 2 men got on a plane. They flew to Alaska. It had always been James's dream to see Alaska. He had talked about it his whole life. He had kept a poster of a grizzly bear on his bedroom wall all the way through college. He had always said, "One of these days, Walt, one of these days we are going to see a real grizzly." Walter and David spent 10 days in Alaska together. They fished. They hiked. They sat by a fire at night and told stories about a man named James Jennings. David learned everything he could about his father. Walter learned everything he could about the son his brother never knew he had. And on the 5th day of the trip, while they were walking along a river bank, a grizzly bear appeared on the other side. It was maybe 200 yards away. It looked up at them. It stared for a long moment, and then it turned and walked slowly back into the woods. Walter said later that he had felt his brother right there beside him in that moment. He said he could almost hear James laughing. He said he knew in his bones that James was finally getting the trip he had waited 45 years for. Walter was just the one who got to take it for him. When they got back from Alaska, Walter did something nobody expected. He invited David and his family to come live near him in Ohio. David's wife, Sarah, had been a little hesitant at first. She had never met Walter. She did not know this new side of the family. But when she saw how her husband lit up around his uncle, how her kids adored their great-uncle Walter, she said yes. 6 months later, David and Sarah had packed up their life in Missouri. They bought a small house 3 blocks away from Walter. David had found a job at a local engineering firm, and Walter had something he had not had in a very long time. He had family within walking distance. David's 2 kids, a 7-year-old boy named Michael and a 4-year-old girl named Ruthie, started calling Walter Papa. Just Papa. Walter walks to their house every Sunday morning for breakfast. Sarah makes pancakes. Michael shows Walter the drawings he made that week. Ruthie climbs into Walter's lap and falls asleep while the grown-ups talk. And Walter, the quiet man who had been sitting alone at his kitchen table for 3 years, is quiet no more. Walter is surrounded by life again. Walter has purpose again. He also has something else. David's daughter Ruthie was named after Walter's late wife. Sarah had not known that when they picked the name. She had just liked it. But when Walter found out, when Sarah showed him the birth certificate, Walter had to sit down. He could not speak for a long time. He just held that piece of paper in his hands and looked at the name of a little girl who shared his wife's name and his brother's blood. Walter said it felt like Ruth and James had picked this little girl out for him from wherever they were now. The ripple effect of that Family Feud episode went far beyond one family. Thousands of viewers wrote letters to the show. People who had lost siblings, people who had lost touch with relatives, people who had secrets they had been carrying for decades. The show received over 50,000 letters in the first month after the episode aired. Steve Harvey himself read as many as he could. He said he had never felt so humbled by his job. Genealogy websites reported a massive spike in DNA testing in the weeks after the episode. People were inspired. They wanted to find lost family members. They wanted to keep old promises. They wanted to be part of something beautiful. One company told reporters that their sales had more than doubled in the 3 weeks after Walter's episode aired. They said it was the biggest surge they had ever seen. Karen, the producer who had interrupted the show, was promoted soon after. She was named Associate Producer of the Year by the network. But she said the real reward was not the promotion. It was getting to witness what she had witnessed that day. She said she had been in the television business for 15 years. She had seen a lot of things, but she had never seen a moment like that one. She said it reminded her why she had started in this business in the first place. Steve Harvey kept a photograph from that day framed in his office. It was a picture taken right after the reveal. Walter and David hugging in the middle of the stage, the audience standing and clapping behind them. Steve standing off to the side, his hand on his chest, his eyes full of tears. He said it was one of the proudest moments of his career, not because he had done anything special. He had just been there, just been present, just been a host who was wise enough to let the moment breathe. Walter Jennings, when asked about it in his one and only interview with Steve a year later, said something that became one of the most quoted lines of the whole story. He said, "You know what I learned? A promise is a funny thing. You can fail to keep it your whole life. And then one day somebody else comes along and keeps it for you, and you realize the promise was never broken. It was just waiting for the right person to finish it." James's picture now sits on Walter's kitchen table, right across from where Ruth used to sit. Walter talks to both of them every morning over his coffee. He tells them about David, about Sarah, about Michael and little Ruthie. He tells them about the garden he planted last spring. He tells them about the trip he finally took to Alaska. And he tells them every single morning that he loves them both, and that he will see them both again someday. That is the legacy. That is the story. That is what happens when a quiet promise made in a hospital room 45 years ago finally finds its way home. If this story moved you even a little bit, please do me a favor right now. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already, and share this video with somebody who needs to be reminded that it is never, ever too late to keep a promise, because it is not. Call that person you have been meaning to call. Write that letter you have been meaning to write. Take that trip you have been putting off. Because in the end, the only thing that matters is love, and the promises we keep for the people who can no longer keep them for themselves. Thank you for watching. And remember, somewhere out there, somebody is waiting for a promise to come true. Maybe today is the day you finally deliver it.